Imagine pulling up to a scene where the flashing red and blue lights are cutting through the early morning fog. Your adrenaline is pumping because you're trained to save lives. And then the world just stops. Imagine the person you're reaching for, the person trapped behind the crumpled steel of a fire engine, is your own father. Now imagine watching all of this unfold from the outside, paralyzed by a screen, knowing that the man losing his world is the same man who hasn't spoken a single word to you in nearly 3 years. I am currently staring at a blinking cursor, my thumb hovering over a contact name that might not even have my number saved anymore, wondering if reaching out is an act of grace or a selfish intrusion into a tragedy that no longer belongs to me. How do you mourn a man who was like a father to you when his own son has erased you from his life? To understand why I'm sitting here, shaking, with the local news playing on a loop in the background, you have to understand that Leo and I weren't just a relationship. We were a lifetime. We met when we were 16, back when life was measured in Friday night football games and who was driving whom to the mall. For 15 years, he was the constant. He was the background noise of my entire existence. We were best friends first. The kind of friends who knew each other's coffee orders and exactly which songs would make the other person cry. We navigated the awkwardness of high school, the uncertainty of our 20s, and eventually the transition into something much deeper. We lived together for 5 years. We shared a kitchen, a bed, a dog, and a vision of the future that seemed as solid as the ground we walked on. And then there was his dad, Big Jim. Jim wasn't just a father-in-law figure. He was the blueprint of what a good man looked like. He was a veteran firefighter, a man who smelled like cedarwood and old turnout gear, with a laugh that could fill a room and make you feel like everything was going to be okay. When my own life felt unstable, Jim was the anchor. He taught me how to change a tire, how to grill the perfect steak, and how to stay calm when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. He used to tell me I was the daughter he never had. And today, I watched a news anchor announce that Big Jim is gone. The details are the kind that haunt you. It was an early morning call, the kind of call firefighters get 1,000 times in a career. He was on his way to a scene, doing exactly what he loved, when the unthinkable happened. But the part that is tearing me apart, the part that makes my stomach turn over, is that Leo, my Leo, or the man who used to be mine, is an EMS lead. He was dispatched to the accident. He arrived at the scene of his own father's wreck, and his brother, who followed in Jim's footsteps, was the one who had to pull their father out of that truck. I can't even begin to process the level of trauma that involves. It's cinematic in its cruelty. And here I am, 300 miles away, blocked on every social media platform, living in the shadow of a no-contact rule that has lasted 2.5 years. Our breakup wasn't a slow burn. It was a structural collapse. I went through a mental health episode that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It was dark, it was messy, and it was loud. I wasn't myself. I was a shell of a person, and in my drowning, I nearly pulled him under with me. The last time we spoke, it was cordial, but the air was heavy with the realization that we had broken something that couldn't be glued back together. He did what he had to do to survive. He blocked me. He moved on. Within months, he had met someone else. And not long after that, he was married. For 2.5 years, I've respected that boundary. I've lived my life. I've gone to therapy. I've gotten healthy. And I've watched from a distance as he built a life that didn't include me. I thought I was okay with that. I thought I had accepted that we were two people who used to know everything about each other and now knew nothing. But death has a way of stripping away the rules we set for ourselves. When the news broke this morning, my first instinct wasn't to check if I was still blocked. It was to grab my keys and drive to his house. It was to be the person who holds his hand while he shakes. But I'm not that person anymore. A different woman is wearing the ring I thought would be mine. A different woman is the one standing in that kitchen, fielding the phone calls from the department and making sure he eats. So I'm stuck in this agonizing limbo. If I send a text, am I offering comfort? Or am I just reminding him of a dark period of his life during his darkest hour? If I show up at the funeral, am I paying my respects to a man I loved? Or am I making a scene by being the crazy ex who doesn't know when to stay away? I can see Big Jim's face so clearly in my mind. I can hear him saying, "Life's too short for grudges, kiddo." But Jim isn't here to mediate this time. I'm looking at my phone, seeing his name in my contacts, a name I haven't clicked on in over 30 months. My heart is telling me that 15 years of history outweighs 3 years of silence. My heart is telling me that you don't let the person who saw you through your worst moments grieve alone. But my head is telling me that I am a ghost in his life, and ghosts should stay in the past. The weight of the what-ifs is crushing. What if he needs to know that the girl who knew him when he was 16 is thinking of him? What if he's sitting there, surrounded by people who only know the married man version of him, and he's longing for someone who remembers the boy he was before he put on the uniform? Or, what if seeing my name on his screen is the last thing he needs right now? What if I'm just an added stressor in a situation that is already overflowing with pain? I find myself scrolling through old photos, the ones I couldn't bring myself to delete. There's one of Jim at our first apartment warming party. He's wearing a ridiculous Kiss the Cook apron, holding a spatula like a scepter, and Leo is in the background, looking at his dad with so much pride. It hurts to look at. It hurts to know that that world is gone, not just because of the breakup, but because the pillar of that family is gone. The tragedy is all over the local news. They're calling him a hero. They're talking about the brotherhood of the fire department and how the community is rallying around the family. And I feel like I'm watching a movie I was supposed to be starring in, but I was recast at the last minute. I'm an audience member now, but I still know all the lines. I know how Leo takes his coffee when he's grieving, black, with way too much sugar because he needs the energy to keep from collapsing. I know he won't sleep for days. I know his brother will try to be the strong one until he breaks. I know all of this, and I can't do a single thing with the information. The news footage is grainy, the kind of raw, handheld video taken by a bystander before the police tape goes up. I see the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement, and for a split second, I see a figure in a dark uniform hunched over, his head in his hands. My heart stops. I know that silhouette. I know the way his shoulders heave when he's trying to swallow a sob. That's Leo. That's the man I shared a life with for 15 years, and he is breaking apart in front of the entire world. And I am sitting in a quiet apartment 300 miles away, clutching a cold cup of tea like it's a lifeline. It feels like a sick joke of the universe. To be so connected to someone's soul and yet so completely severed from their reality. I start thinking back to the first time I met Big Jim. It wasn't at some formal dinner. It was when Leo and I were 16 and we'd accidentally backed his beat-up sedan into a fence. I was terrified. I thought he'd scream, thought he'd be that stereotypical scary dad. Instead, he'd walked out of the house, looked at the crumpled bumper, looked at our pale, shaking faces, and just started laughing. "Well," he'd said, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag, "I guess today's the day you learn how to use a rubber mallet." He spent the next 4 hours teaching us, not just how to fix the car, but how to handle a mistake. That was Jim. He didn't believe in dwelling on the crash. He believed in the repair. He treated me like I belonged in that garage from day one. He saw me through every milestone, my college graduation, my first real job, the first time I moved in with Leo. When Leo and I would have those explosive, young adult arguments about nothing, Jim would pull me aside and say, "He's got a hard head, just like his old man. But he's got a heart like a furnace, kid. Don't let the fire go out." And then, I was the one who let the fire go out. I don't talk about that year much. It's a blur of grey walls and heavy silence. My mental health didn't just slip, it cratered. I became a person I didn't recognise, paranoid, volatile, deeply depressed. I pushed Leo away because I didn't think I deserved to be pulled out of the dark. I said things I can never take back. I made our home, our sanctuary, a place of tension and tears. For 5 years of living together, we were a team. In that final year, I was a saboteur. When we finally ended it, it wasn't because the love was gone. It was because the exhaustion had taken over. Leo looked at me with so much pity and pain that I couldn't stand to see my reflection in his eyes anymore. The breakup was the only way for him to breathe again. I understood why he blocked me. I really did. He needed to build a new world where the air wasn't thick with the scent of my breakdown. He needed a clean slate. But Jim never blocked me. Not in my heart, anyway. Even after the breakup, I'd get these phantom urges to call him. When my car made a weird clicking sound, or when I finally landed a promotion, my brain would instinctively go to, Jim would know what to do, or Jim would be so proud. I never called, of course. I respected the silence Leo demanded. But now, that silence feels like a physical weight on my chest. I look at the clock. It's been 6 hours since the news broke. The brotherhood of the fire department will be in full swing by now. There will be casseroles on the counter and a line of dress uniforms out the door. And somewhere in the middle of that sea of navy blue and gold is Leo. Probably sitting at the same kitchen table where we used to do the Sunday crossword. Is his wife there? Of course she is. She's the one holding the napkins. She's the one people are offering their "I'm so sorry for your loss" to. She has the title. She has the legal right to be in that room. And I'm just a ghost from a decade and a half of history. I'm the girl who knew Jim when he still had all his hair. I'm the girl who knew his favourite secret ingredient in his chili. I'm the girl who was supposed to be his daughter-in-law. Does she even know who I am? Does she know that for 15 years I was the person Leo turned to? Or am I just the unstable ex he warned her about? The thought of her seeing a message from me on his phone makes my skin crawl. I don't want to be a source of drama. I don't want to be the reason they have an argument in the middle of his morning. But God, the idea of him thinking I don't care, that I'm so cold I could see his father's death on the news and just keep scrolling. That's even worse. I find myself opening my contacts. My thumb hovers over his name. Leo. I haven't even changed the contact photo. It's a picture from a hiking trip we took 5 years ago. He's covered in dirt, grinning at the camera with his arm around my shoulder. We looked so permanent. I start typing. Leo, I am so sorry. I saw the news. Your dad was an incredible man, and the world is darker without him. I'm thinking of you and your brother. I stare at the blue bubble. My heart is hammering against my ribs. If I hit send, what happens? If I'm blocked, the message will just sit there, undelivered, a tiny digital scream into the void. If I'm not blocked, I've just dropped a bomb into his lap. He's grieving the most traumatic event of his life. He watched his father die, for God's sake, and suddenly his ex-girlfriend from the dark times is popping up on his screen. Is that a comfort, or is it a haunting? I think about the funeral. It will be a sea of people. Firefighter funerals are massive cinematic events. Bagpipes, folded flags, the final alarm. I could go. I could stand in the back, wear a mask and sunglasses and pay my respects to the man who was a father to me when mine wasn't around. I wouldn't even have to speak to Leo. I could just be a face in the crowd. But would that be selfish? Am I going for Jim? Or am I going because I'm desperate for a connection to a life I lost? I remember one night, years ago, when Jim and I were sitting on the porch while Leo was inside asleep. Jim was smoking a cigar, the cherry glowing in the dark. He'd turned to me and said, "You know, life doesn't always go the way we plan the blueprints. Sometimes the foundation cracks. But as long as you don't walk away from the site, you can always rebuild. At the time, I thought he was talking about my career. Now, I realize he might have been talking about everything. I'm paralyzed by the shoulds and musts. I should stay away. I must respect his new marriage. But I loved that man. Jim was a hero, not just because he ran into burning buildings, but because he knew how to love people through their worst moments. He loved me when I was at my absolute lowest. If I stay silent, am I betraying the very kindness he taught me? I look back at the news. They're showing a photo of Jim in his full dress uniform. He looks so stoic, so brave. And then they show a photo of the two brothers, Leo and his brother, as little kids, sitting on the bumper of a fire truck. They look so small. They look like they need their dad. My eyes are blurring with tears. I can't stop thinking about Leo at that scene. The dispatcher's voice over the radio, the realization that the vehicle fire, or the accident with entrapment, was his father. The smell of smoke and metal, the feeling of his brother's hands on him as they realized it was too late. How do you survive that? And how do you survive it when the person who knows you best is a stranger to you now? The silence in my apartment is deafening, punctuated only by the occasional notification on my phone. Friends from my past, people who knew us as Leo and me, reaching out to ask if I've heard. Every, "I'm so sorry," and "Are you okay?" feels like a jagged piece of glass. They don't know that I'm effectively a stranger to him now. They don't know that I'm mourning from the sidelines, a spectator to a tragedy I once would have been at the very centre of. I remember the what-if conversations we used to have. When you date a first responder, the possibility of the call is always there, hovering like a shadow in the corner of the room. We had a plan. If something happened to Jim or to Leo, I was the one who was supposed to be there. I was the one with the emergency contact info. I was the one who knew which hospital they'd go to, which brothers in the department to call, where the "in case of emergency" folder was kept in the top drawer of the desk. Now, all that information is useless. I'm a vault filled with codes to a house that's changed all the locks. The woman who has those codes now, his wife, I only know her from a few fleeting glimpses before the blocks went up. She looks kind. She looks stable. She looks like the person Leo needed after I broke his heart into a million jagged pieces. I try not to resent her, but in this moment I am consumed by a bitter, hollow envy. Not because she has him, but because she gets to comfort him. She gets to be the one to witness his grief and tell him it's going to be okay. She gets to honor Jim in the way he deserves, while I'm stuck here, wondering if my very presence would be considered a desecration of his memory. I think back to that mental health episode. It's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. It wasn't just a rough patch. It was like a thick, black oil had been poured over my entire life. I was paranoid. I thought Leo was looking for reasons to leave me, so I gave him 1,000 reasons to go. I would scream until my throat was raw over things that didn't exist, and then I would sink into a catatonic state where I couldn't even tell him I loved him. Leo was a hero back then too. He tried. God, did he try. He stayed up with me through the night. He took me to every appointment. He held me while I shook. But everyone has a breaking point, even a man trained to handle life and death situations. You can only perform CPR on a relationship for so long before you realize the heartbeat isn't coming back. When we finally called it, I saw the light go out in his eyes. He didn't hate me. He was just empty. He had nothing left to give. That's why he blocked me. It wasn't out of malice. It was a tourniquet. He had to stop the bleeding. He had to save himself. And now he's back in the trenches of a different kind of trauma. The kind that doesn't just bruise the soul, but shatters the foundation of your world. Jim was his hero. Jim was the reason Leo became a paramedic. To be the one on the scene, To be the one who has to use your professional skills on your own flesh and blood. I can't even wrap my head around the psychological toll that takes. I look at the draft on my phone again. Leo, I am so sorry. It feels so small, so inadequate. 6 words to cover 15 years of history and the death of a patriarch. I delete it. I start again. I'm sitting here thinking about the time your dad tried to teach us to swing dance in the kitchen. I know how much you loved him. My heart is breaking for you and your brother. I delete that too. It's too personal. To remember when. It feels like I'm trying to remind him of us when he should be focused on him. I find myself walking to my closet and pulling out an old shoebox. I haven't opened it in years. Inside are the relics of a life lived in a different timeline. There's a firefighter's daughter t-shirt Jim bought me at a convention once. There's a card he wrote me for my 25th birthday that just says, "Keep shining, kid. You're part of the family." And there are photos. Dozens of them. In almost every photo of Leo and his dad, they're leaning into each other. They had the same crooked smile, the same way of squinting when the sun hit their eyes. You could see the bond in the way they stood. It wasn't just father and son, it was teammates. As I'm looking through the photos, my phone pings. It's a text from Leo's cousin, Mike. Mike and I were always close. "Hey," the text reads, "I'm sure you've seen. It's bad, Gnome. Leo is a mess. We're all at the house. I know things are complicated, but I thought you should know the funeral is Friday at St. Jude's. Full honours." My breath hitches. Full honours. That means the streets will be lined with ladder trucks. There will be a procession miles long. The entire city will stop to say goodbye to Big Jim. "Do you think I should come?" I type back, my fingers trembling. I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to upset Leo or his wife. Mike takes a long time to reply. The ... bubbles appear and disappear, teasing me. "Honestly," Mike finally says, "Jim loved you. He never stopped asking about you. Leo is in a fog. I don't think he'd even notice you in the crowd. But if you want to say goodbye to Jim, you should come. Just maybe stay in the back?" Stay in the back. The words sting, but they're fair. I am a back-of-the-room person now. I am the background noise. The thought of Jim asking about me makes the tears start again. Even after I'd pushed his son away, even after I'd caused so much chaos, Jim still had a place for me in his heart. That was the kind of man he was. He didn't see people as their mistakes. He saw them as their potential. He saw the girl I was before the darkness took over, and he held onto that version of me. I owe it to him to be there. But do I owe it to Leo to stay away? The conflict is a physical pain in my gut. If I go, I'm risking a confrontation. I'm risking being seen as the ex who can't let go. If I don't go, I'm missing my only chance to say a final goodbye to a man who shaped me into the woman I am today. I think about Leo's wife again. I imagine her sitting on the couch, surrounded by Jim's things, trying to be the pillar Leo needs. If she sees me there, will she feel threatened? Will she feel like I'm trying to claim a piece of a history she wasn't part of? Or will she see me for what I am? Just another person who loved Jim and is devastated by his loss. And what about the text? Mike said Leo is a mess. A mess. My Leo. The man who always had a plan, who could stay calm in the middle of a multi-car pileup, who never let his voice crack. If he's a mess, he's truly broken. The urge to comfort him is an instinctual reflex. It's like a phantom limb. I want to reach out and pull him into the safety of my arms, even though I'm the one who burned the bridge to that safety in the first place. I decide to do something I haven't done in 2.5 years. I unblock his Instagram. I know it's a mistake. I know I'm going to see things that hurt. But I need to see him. I need to know he's still standing. His profile is public. I scroll past the wedding photos, a blur of white lace and smiles that make my chest ache. And I find the post from 3 hours ago. It's just a black square. No caption, just a void. The comments are flooded with blue hearts and rest in peace messages from people I used to know. And then I see a comment from his wife. "I've got you, baby, always. We'll get through this together." The words are a punch to the stomach. She does have him. She's the one in the foxhole with him now. And as much as it kills me, I have to respect that. But how do you respect a boundary when the world has just been set on fire? Seeing those words from his wife, "I've got you," felt like a physical barrier being erected between my past and his present. It was a reminder that the space I used to occupy, the role of the protector and the partner, had been filled. And it had been filled by someone who didn't have the baggage I carried. She didn't have the memories of the screaming matches or the days where I couldn't get out of bed. She was the version of us that worked. But as I sat there, staring at the screen until the light dimmed and went black, a memory surfaced. It wasn't a memory of Leo. It was a memory of Jim. It was during the peak of my mental health crisis, about 3 months before the final breakup. Leo had gone to work. He was on a grueling 48-hour shift, and I was spiraling. I had convinced myself that everyone was better off without me, that I was a poison in their lives. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I hadn't showered. The house was a mess, and I was sitting on the kitchen floor just staring at the wall. There was a knock at the door. I didn't answer. Then I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Jim had a spare. He walked in, saw the state of the house, and didn't say a word. He didn't ask me why I was on the floor. He didn't tell me to cheer up or get it together. He just went to the sink, started washing the dishes, and put on a pot of coffee. After about 20 minutes, he walked over, sat down on the floor next to me, which for a man with bad knees from 30 years of firefighting was no small feat, and handed me a mug. "You know, kiddo," he said, his voice low and steady. "Sometimes the fire gets too big for one person to put out. That's why we have a crew. You're trying to fight a 5-alarm blaze with a garden hose. Let us help you." He stayed for 4 hours. He helped me clean the kitchen. He made me a sandwich and sat there until I ate every bite. Before he left, he hugged me and whispered, "Leo loves you, but he's scared. Don't hold that against him. Just keep breathing. One breath at a time." Jim was the only one who didn't look at me like I was broken. He looked at me like I was a person who was just currently overwhelmed. He was my crew. And now his fire was out, and I wasn't there to help his family handle the smoke. The guilt of that. The realization that the man who sat on the floor with me was gone, and I was too afraid of an awkward social interaction to say anything, began to outweigh my fear of Leo's reaction. I went back to my messages. I didn't want to send a text that required a response. I didn't want to start a conversation. I just wanted to acknowledge the giant, Jim-sized hole in the world. I typed, "Leo, I am so incredibly sorry about Jim. He was a hero in every sense of the word, and he was so proud of you and your brother. I'm mourning him with you today. You don't need to reply to this. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of your family." I didn't let myself overthink it this time. I hit send. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I watched the screen. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10. The delivered notification appeared. I wasn't blocked. He hadn't blocked my number. For 2.5 years, I'd assumed he'd completely erased me. But my number was still allowed through his firewall. The realization made me dizzy. Why? Did he forget? Or was there some tiny subconscious part of him that wanted to keep a line open, just in case? I put the phone face down on the table. I couldn't stare at it. I wouldn't. I told myself I didn't expect a reply, and I had to mean it. This wasn't about getting him back. This wasn't about reopening our relationship. This was about Jim. But an hour passed, and then 2. Every time my phone buzzed with a work email or a promotional text, I jumped. I was a mess. I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment. I needed to move. I drove to a park near my house, a place where Leo and I used to take our dog. It was a grey, drizzly afternoon, the kind of weather Jim used to call good sleeping weather. I walked the trails, my mind racing. If I went to the funeral, what would I wear? It sounds like a shallow thought, but in the world of first responders, protocol is everything. I still had my department spouse dress, a conservative dark navy wrap dress that I'd worn to a dozen promotions and award ceremonies. It felt like a costume now, a relic of a life that belonged to someone else. I thought about the brotherhood. I knew exactly how it would go. There would be a sea of navy blue. The pipes and drums would play Amazing Grace, and it would echo off the buildings. There would be a final radio call, the last alarm, where the dispatcher calls Jim's name 3 times over the air, followed by silence. It is the most heartbreaking sound in the world. I couldn't imagine Leo standing there, hearing that. I couldn't imagine his brother, the one who pulled him out, having to stand at attention while the bugler played taps. I found a bench and sat down, watching a group of kids playing soccer in the distance. They were so loud and full of life, a sharp contrast to the funereal weight in my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My breath caught. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. It was a text from Leo. "Thank you. He really did love you like a daughter. It's been a hard day." I stared at the words until they blurred. He really did love you like a daughter. The use of the past tense, loved, hit me like a physical blow. It was the finality of it, and the fact that Leo had replied at all, and that he'd mentioned Jim's love for me. It felt like a tiny bridge had been built over the canyon of our silence. It wasn't a "come over" or an "I miss you." It was just a shared moment of grief. But it was the most significant thing that had happened to me in years. I didn't reply. I knew better than to push. I'd said what I needed to say, and he'd acknowledged it. That should have been enough. But then another message came through. "The service is Friday at 10 a.m. If you want to be there, you should be. Don't worry about anything else. My mum would probably like to see you." His mum. Carol. I hadn't even thought about Carol. She was the woman who had welcomed me into her home every Sunday for a decade. She was the woman who had taught me how to knit when my anxiety was at its worst. She was now a widow. The invitation changed everything. It wasn't just me wanting to go. It was Leo giving me permission. It was a safe passage through the minefield of our past. But even with his permission, the anxiety didn't go away. If anything, it intensified. Because going to that funeral meant seeing her, the wife. It meant seeing the friends we used to share. It meant facing the version of myself that everyone remembered, the one who fell apart. I went home and pulled the navy dress out of the closet. It smelled like cedar and a hint of the perfume I used to wear when Leo and I were happy. I tried it on. It fit differently now. I was thinner, the lines of my face sharper. I looked like a woman who had survived something, rather than the girl who was still in the middle of the storm. I looked at myself in the mirror and realized that I was terrified, not of the grief, but of the confrontation with my old life. Could I stand in a room full of people who knew my darkest secrets and just be? Could I honor Jim without making it about my own pain? I stayed up late that night, looking at old videos on my laptop. There was one of a barbecue at Jim's house. The camera is shaky, held by Leo. Jim is standing over the grill, laughing as he tries to flip a burger that's clearly stuck. "Hey, look at this!" Jim shouts, pointing at me. I'm sitting at the picnic table, laughing, looking healthy and vibrant. She thinks she's going to get a medium rare burger, but she's getting charcoal. "I'll eat it anyway, Jim!" I yell back in the video. "That's my girl," he says, waving the spatula. The video cuts to Leo, who turns the camera on himself for a split second. He's smiling, that real, deep-down smile that reached his eyes. He looks so happy. We all did. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. I knew then that I had to go. Not for Leo, and not for myself. I had to go for the man who promised me I was part of the crew. I had to show up for his last alarm. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a thought crept in that I couldn't shake. Leo said, "Don't worry about anything else." Does his wife know he texted me? Does she know he invited me? Or am I about to walk into a situation that is far more complicated than a funeral? The morning of the funeral, the air was sharp and cold, the kind of weather that makes your breath hitch in your chest before you even have a chance to think. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, looking at a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. The navy dress was on, my hair was pulled back, and my makeup was minimal, just enough to hide the fact that I hadn't slept more than 3 hours. I looked respectable. I looked like someone who belonged at a funeral, but I felt like an imposter. I'd spent the last 48 hours oscillating between resolve and total panic. Every time I thought about the 300-mile drive, my heart would start to race. I'd imagine the moment I'd have to walk past the family pews. I'd imagine the look on Carol's face, or worse, the look on Leo's. But then I'd think about Jim, sitting on that kitchen floor with a mug of coffee, and I knew I couldn't stay away. The drive was a blur of grey highways and bad radio stations. As I got closer to the town where I'd spent 15 years of my life, the landmarks started to hit me like physical blows. There was the diner where Leo and I had our first real date. There was the park where we'd celebrated our 3rd anniversary. There was the hospital where Jim had been taken that one time he'd broken his leg on a call. It was like driving through a museum of a life that had been curated by someone else. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the presence of the fire department was everywhere. Black and purple bunting hung from the overpasses. Every digital sign for miles didn't display the time or temperature. They all said the same thing. Rest in peace, Captain James Big Jim Callahan. I pulled into a gas station to fix my hair and try to breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my water bottle. I looked at my phone. No new messages from Leo. No, don't come, or change of heart. Just the quiet weight of the invitation. As I approached St. Jude's, the scale of the full honours ceremony became clear. It was massive. 2 ladder trucks from neighbouring towns had parked facing each other. Their aerial ladders extended high into the air to form an arch. Hanging from the centre was a massive American flag that swayed slowly in the wind. The street was lined with fire engines from 3 different counties, their chrome polished until it gleamed like mirrors. And then there were the uniforms. Hundreds of them, a literal sea of navy blue. Firefighters in their Class A dress uniforms, white gloves and peaked caps. They stood in perfect, silent rows, a wall of brotherhood that seemed impenetrable to someone like me. I parked 3 blocks away. I didn't want anyone to see my car and recognize it, although I realized with a pang that Leo probably didn't even remember my license plate anymore. I walked toward the church, my heels clicking on the pavement, feeling more exposed with every step. I saw the procession before I reached the doors. The bagpipers were tuning their instruments, that haunting, discordant drone filling the air. And then the hearse arrived. The silence that fell over the crowd was absolute. You could hear the wind whistling through the flag. You could hear the distant sound of a siren somewhere else in the city, a reminder that the world doesn't stop, even when one of its heroes does. The pallbearers, 6 massive men from Jim's station, stepped forward. They moved with a synchronized, heavy grace. Behind them, I saw the family. My heart stopped. There was Carol, draped in black, supported by Leo on one side and his brother Tommy on the other. They looked like they were barely holding each other up. Leo was in his dress uniform, his back straight, his face a mask of professional stoicism. But I knew him. I knew the way his jaw tightened when he was trying not to cry. I knew the way he blinked rapidly when the world was getting to be too much. And then I saw her. She was walking just behind them, her hand on Leo's shoulder. She was beautiful, even in grief. She wore a simple black coat and a hat with a small veil. She looked like she belonged there. She looked like the anchor. Seeing them together, the unit they had become, felt like a door slamming shut in my face. It was one thing to know he was married. It was another to see the physical space she occupied in his life. She was the one who would take his hat when he got home. She was the one who would sit with him in the silence of their house tonight. I was just a woman standing on a sidewalk 3 blocks away, clutching a damp tissue. For a second, I almost turned around. I almost walked back to my car and drove those 300 miles back to my quiet, safe apartment. What was I doing here? I was an intruder. I was a ghost trying to haunt a house that had been remodeled and sold years ago. But then the bagpipes started. Going home. The first notes tore through the air, low and mourning. It's a sound that's designed to break you. It's the sound of a final goodbye. I watched as they carried Jim's casket into the church, the flag draped over the top. I thought about the man inside that box. The man who loved chili and bad jokes and who always made sure I had a seat at his table. "Don't walk away from the sight," he'd said. "You can always rebuild." I didn't come here to rebuild a relationship with Leo. I came here to honor the man who never gave up on me. I waited until the family and the department had filed into the church. I waited until the lobby was empty and the music from the organ started to swell, muffled by the heavy oak doors. Then I took a deep breath, wiped a stray tear from my cheek, and walked up the steps. I didn't go to the front. I did exactly what Mike had suggested. I stayed in the very last row, tucked into a corner behind a stone pillar. I was in the shadows, a spectator once again. The church was packed. People were standing in the aisles. The air was thick with the scent of incense, lilies, and damp wool. I looked at the back of Leo's head, 10 rows ahead of me. He was sitting next to his wife. I saw her reach out and take his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. He didn't pull away. The service was beautiful. They talked about Jim's bravery, his 30 years of service, the lives he'd saved. But they also talked about the man. They talked about his garden. They talked about how he used to sneak treats to the station dogs. They talked about how he was a man of his word. Jim Callahan didn't just fight fires, the priest said from the pulpit. He built shelters. He built a home for his family, a community for his fellow firefighters, and a sanctuary for anyone who needed a hand up. I felt a sob catch in my throat. A sanctuary for anyone who needed a hand up. That was me. I was one of the people he'd built a shelter for. I spent the entire service focused on the casket and the cross above it. I didn't let my eyes wander to Leo more than I had to. I wanted to keep this pure. I wanted this to be about Jim. But as the service drew to a close, the tension in the room shifted. It was time for the final honours. It was time for the last alarm. The priest stepped aside, and a high-ranking officer from the department stepped up to the microphone. He looked out over the crowd, his face grim. "Dispatch," he said into a handheld radio. "This is Engine 42, requesting a final signal for Captain James Callahan." The radio crackled. The sound of the dispatcher's voice, amplified through the church's sound system, was hauntingly clear. "All units, stand by for a final alarm for Captain James Callahan, badge 402. The silence in the church was so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on my lungs. "Captain James Callahan," the dispatcher called out. Silence. "Captain James Callahan." Silence. "Captain James Callahan has returned to quarters. His watch is over. May he rest in peace." Then the bell began to toll. 3 rings. 3 times. The long return. I looked up, and for the first time I saw Leo's shoulders drop. He wasn't the paramedic anymore. He wasn't the officer. He was just a son. He put his head in his hands, and I saw his wife lean into him, her arm going around his back. And that's when it happened. In the movement of the crowd standing up to begin the procession out, Leo turned his head slightly. Maybe he was looking for a tissue, or maybe he just felt the weight of someone's gaze. He looked toward the back of the church. Through the sea of uniforms, through the hundreds of people, his eyes found the pillar, and behind that pillar, he found me. The eye contact lasted for maybe 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, 15 years of history came crashing back into the room like a tidal wave. It was a look I'd seen 1,000 times before. The way he looked at me when he was overwhelmed, when the world was too loud and he needed an anchor. But this time, I wasn't the anchor. I was a ghost. His eyes widened just a fraction. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he wanted to scream at me to get out of his sight. He looked hollowed out. He looked like he was seeing something from a dream he hadn't thought about in years. Then, his wife whispered something in his ear, pulling his attention back to the present, and the moment was severed. He turned away, and the family began their slow, agonizing walk down the center aisle, following the flag-draped casket of the man who had been the sun in our shared solar system. I stood frozen against the stone pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to run. I wanted to bolt out the side door and disappear into the grey morning before anyone else could see me. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor. I watched as Carol passed by, her face a mask of devastating grief. She looked so small, so fragile. She was a woman who had spent 30 years worrying every time her husband left for a shift, only for the worst to happen on a routine morning. As the church emptied, the sound of the bagpipes started up again outside. They were playing Amazing Grace now, the notes long and mournful echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. I waited until the last of the firefighters had filed out, their boots echoing like a drumbeat on the stone floor. Only then did I step out from the shadows. I walked toward the front of the church. The air was heavy with the smell of extinguished candles and the lingering scent of floral arrangements. I stopped at the very front pew where the family had just been sitting. I looked at the empty space where Jim's casket had rested. It felt like a void, a rip in the fabric of reality. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, laminated photo. It was a picture Jim had given me years ago. It was just the two of us, standing in front of his old grill, both of us covered in flour because we'd tried to make homemade pizza dough that had turned into a disaster. Jim was laughing, his arm around my shoulder, and I was looking up at him with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love you only have for the people who make you feel truly safe. On the back, I'd written a simple note. "Thank you for being my crew. I'll never forget the lessons you taught me. Rest easy, Captain. Your girl." I tucked the photo into the base of one of the massive floral sprays, hidden behind the lilies. It was my secret goodbye, a piece of me that would stay with him, even if I couldn't stay in the lives of the people he'd left behind. The cemetery service was held on a hillside overlooking the city. The wind was even sharper here, whipping the flags and tugging at the coats of the hundreds of people gathered around the open grave. I stayed in the far periphery, standing near a large oak tree that gave me a clear view without being in anyone's direct line of sight. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing I've ever witnessed. The precision of the colour guard, the way they moved in perfect unison as they removed the flag from the casket. I watched as they folded it, the sharp, deliberate movements creating a perfect blue triangle of stars. The fire chief stood before Carol. He took a knee, his voice carrying on the wind as he presented her with the flag. "On behalf of a grateful department and a grateful city, we present this flag as a token of our appreciation for the honourable and faithful service of your husband, Captain James Callahan." I saw Carol take the flag, pressing it to her chest, her head bowing as she finally broke down. Leo was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his face set in a grim, stony expression. I could see the muscles in his neck straining. He was trying to be the man his father was. He was trying to be the strength for everyone else. And then came the bugle. Taps. There is no sound on earth quite like taps played at a funeral for a fallen hero. It is the sound of the end. It is the sound of a light going out. Each note was a needle to my heart. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, picturing Jim one last time. I pictured him in his favourite recliner, a beer in one hand and a crossword puzzle in the other, grumbling about how the clues were getting harder every year. When the final note faded into the wind, the service was over. People began to disperse, moving toward the family to offer their final condolences before heading to the reception. This was the moment I should have left. My duty was done. I'd paid my respects. I'd seen him laid to rest. But as I turned to go, I saw a familiar figure heading straight for me. It was Mike. He'd seen me by the tree. He was still in his dress uniform, his eyes red and his face weary. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked up and pulled me into a crushing hug. "I'm glad you came," he whispered into my hair. "I didn't think I could," I said, my voice cracking. But I couldn't stay away. Mike pulled back, looking at me with a sad, knowing smile. "He would have wanted you here. You know that. He always said you were the one who understood the life better than anyone." "How is he, Mike?" I asked, nodding toward Leo, who was still surrounded by a crowd of people. "He's in shock," Mike said, his voice dropping. "He hasn't slept. He hasn't eaten. He's just performing, doing what he thinks he's supposed to do. But I'm worried about him. That scene, pulling Jim out, that's not something you just get over." "I know," I said, a fresh wave of grief hitting me. "I can't even imagine." "Listen," Mike said, glancing back toward the family. "Carol saw you. She wants to say hello. She told me to come find you before you left." Panic flared in my chest. "Mike, I can't. His wife, the people, it's too much. I don't want to cause a scene." "No one is going to cause a scene," Mike said firmly, taking my arm. "It's a funeral, Malem. People are here to grieve. And Carol wants to see you. She's the widow. She gets what she wants today." He didn't give me a choice. He led me toward the center of the gathering. I felt like I was walking into a firing squad. I saw the heads turn. I saw the whispers. I saw people I hadn't spoken to in years. Leo's fellow paramedics, the wives of the firefighters we used to host for dinner, their eyes widening as they realized it was me. And then I was standing in front of Carol. She looked up from the flag in her lap, and for a moment, the years seemed to melt away. She didn't look at me like an ex-girlfriend or a mental health case. She looked at me like a daughter. "Oh, honey," she breathed, standing up with a groan. I didn't even have time to speak before she was in my arms. She smelled like the same lavender perfume she'd worn for 20 years. She clung to me, her body shaking with silent sobs. "He loved you so much," she whispered. "He never stopped rooting for you. He'd be so happy you're here." "I loved him too, Carol," I managed to say, my tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry." We stood there for what felt like an eternity. Two women bound by the loss of a man who had been the pillar of our lives. When she finally pulled back, she wiped my face with a trembling hand. "You look good," she said. "You look healthy." "I am," I said. "I'm doing much better." I wish he could have seen it. "He saw," she said, nodding toward the grave. "He knew you had it in you." And then I felt a presence behind her, a shadow that blocked the sun. I looked up, and there was Leo. He was standing 5 feet away, his hat in his hands, watching us. His wife was right beside him, her hand tucked into his elbow, her eyes curious and cautious. The silence that fell between us was heavy, charged with all the things we hadn't said for 30 months. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of 5 years of living together and 10 years of being best friends. Carol stepped back, sensing the shift in the air. "I'm going to go sit in the car for a minute," she said, giving my hand one last squeeze. "Leo, why don't you say hello to Gu?" She walked away, taking Mike with her, leaving the 3 of us in a triangle of absolute awkwardness. Leo took a step forward. His face was unreadable, a mask of exhaustion and grief. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a hardness to his jaw that was new. "You came," he said. His voice was raspy, like he'd been screaming or hadn't used it in days. "I came," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I had to." He nodded, looking down at his boots. "Thank you for the text. It meant a lot." "Of course." I looked at his wife. She was watching me with an intensity that made me want to shrink. But then, she did something I didn't expect. She let go of Leo's arm and stepped forward. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice steady and surprisingly kind. "Leo has told me a lot about your history. I'm sorry for your loss as well. I know Jim was very important to you. It was a peace offering, a recognition of my place in the story, even if I was no longer a main character." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, meeting her eyes. "He was an incredible man. I'm glad Leo has you." I meant it. In that moment, seeing the way she stood by him, I realized that my envy had been replaced by a strange, hollow relief. He was taken care of. He wasn't alone in this. Leo looked back up at me, and for a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the boy I'd known since I was 16. I saw the man who had held me while I cried in the dark. I saw the grief that was threatening to swallow him whole. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew," Leo said, his voice cracking, "even when you didn't believe it." "I believe it now," I said. "Good," he said. He'd be glad. There was so much more to say. There were a million questions, a million apologies, a million "I miss yous" that were caught in the back of my throat. But this wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. This was Jim's day, and we were just the survivors. "I should go," I said, taking a step back. "I just wanted to say goodbye." Leo nodded. "Safe drive home." I turned and walked away, back toward the oak tree, back toward the gate of the cemetery. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see them standing there, a new unit, a new family, moving on into a world without Jim. But as I reached my car, I felt a strange sense of peace. For 2.5 years, I'd been living with the weight of the no-contact rule, the weight of the shame of how things ended. I'd felt like a villain in someone else's story, but Jim hadn't seen me as a villain. He'd seen me as a person who was worth fighting for. And by showing up today, I had finally fought for myself. I had honored the love he'd given me, and in doing so, I'd finally closed the book on the version of me that was broken. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the tail end of the procession leave the cemetery. The flashing lights were gone. The bagpipes were silent. There was just the wind and the quiet dignity of the hills. I realized then that life is a series of fires. Some we start ourselves, some are accidents, and some are just the inevitable result of living in a world that burns. But we aren't defined by the fires. We're defined by how we show up for the last alarm. We're defined by the crew we keep and the way we honor the people who taught us how to breathe through the smoke. I started the engine and began the long drive back to my own life. I was still grieving. I was still sad. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a woman who had survived the blaze and was finally ready to rebuild. Have you ever had to face someone from your past during a moment of intense tragedy? Would you have gone to the funeral or stayed away to respect the boundaries? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how to handle the ghosts of our past when life gets real. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the complexities of life and